A biker at a quiet rural gas station sees a teenage girl crying beside an empty pump, and without hesitation he pays for her gas. But the moment her abusive boyfriend finds out, he charges at the biker with violence that shocks everyone, and what happens next unravels a chain of secrets, betrayals, and twists no one in America or the UK will see coming. Before we begin, hit that subscribe button, because the story you're about to hear proves that heroes don't wear capes, sometimes they ride motorcycles. On a windswept Sunday afternoon in a small American highway town where the sky looked like it was stitched together with gray clouds and fading sunlight, a seasoned biker named Reed Maddox, known to most as Maddox Steel, rolled into the old, rust-stained Ridgeview Gas Mart, hoping only to stretch his back, refill his tank, and get back on the open road before the storm broke. But destiny had other plans, because as he slowed his Harley near Pump 3, he saw a trembling girl, maybe 19, maybe younger, clutching her phone with one hand and wiping tears from her cheeks with the other, her car door open, her hands shaking as she struggled to insert her debit card into the ancient, glitching gas reader, and every time it declined, she flinched like the machine was slapping her. Maddox cut his engine, pulled off his helmet, and felt a tight pull in his chest, the kind he only felt when something wasn't just wrong, it was dangerous, and after 2 decades of riding across states, he developed a sixth sense for trouble, especially when it came dressed in fear. He approached slowly so as not to frighten her, asking if she needed help, and she tried to swallow her tears, insisting she was fine, but the more she spoke, the more obvious it became that she was anything but fine. Her name was Lila, she whispered eventually, and she needed only $10 of gas to get home, but her card kept declining, and she couldn't call anyone because her phone screen was cracked, glitching, and one corner looked like it had been smashed by sheer force, the kind of break that doesn't happen from a fall, the kind that happens when someone angry hurls it against a wall. Maddox, without hesitation, pulled out a 20 and inserted it into the machine, telling her not to worry about paying him back, but instead of relief, her face morphed into fear, not fear of him, but fear of what this small act of kindness would cause. She begged him to leave before he arrived, and the way she said he, like the name alone could summon a storm, set Maddox's jaw tight, because he'd heard that tone before from women running from violent men who mistook control for love. She finally confessed that her boyfriend Derek controlled her money, her car, her phone, her entire life, and that if he found out a stranger, especially a man, had paid for her gas, he would explode, and she wasn't exaggerating. Maddox offered to stay until she was safely on the road, but she urged him to go, hopping into her car with frantic eyes, but before she could pull away, a roaring black Dodge Charger screeched into the lot like a predator catching scent of prey. Derek stormed out, tall, muscular, veins popping, tattoos snaking up his arms, his face twisted in the kind of fury that doesn't come from misunderstanding but from entitlement, and without waiting for an explanation, he yanked Lila's door open and started screaming at her, demanding to know who the biker was and why his gas pump showed $20. When she tried to explain, he grabbed her wrist so hard Maddox winced, and something inside him snapped. He couldn't walk away, not this time, not when a scared girl was being crushed under someone else's rage. Maddox stepped forward and calmly told Derek to let her go. But Derek turned his rage toward him, shoving Lila aside and marching toward the biker like he wanted to start a war, mocking his age, his bike, and threatening to teach him a lesson, but Maddox barely heard the insults. His eyes were locked on the bruise on Lila's arm, shaped like fingers, fresh and dark. Derek swung first, a wild, angry punch, but Maddox, who had spent years in biker bars where fights were practically currency, dodged effortlessly. He didn't strike back at first, hoping to defuse the situation, but Derek kept coming, fueled by ego and insecurity, and eventually Maddox pushed him back to protect himself, sending Derek stumbling into the pump. That single motion, simple, necessary, ignited the fuse. Derek lunged again, screaming threats. Lila begged them to stop, a passing couple gasped, and the store clerk ducked behind the counter and called 911. Maddox managed to restrain Derek long enough to tell him to back off, his voice low and steady, but Derek spat in his face and vowed he'd make Maddox pay for touching what's mine, and those words chilled Lila to the bone. In the distance, the faint sound of sirens began to echo, but before the police arrived, Derek scrambled to his feet, pointed at Maddox, and snarled that he would finish this later. He grabbed Lila by the arm, dragging her back to the Charger, and sped away with tires screaming, leaving Maddox standing at the pump, tense, breath heavy, knowing deep down that this encounter wasn't over, because men like Derek never let anything go, not bruised pride, not imaginary insults, not the existence of a stranger who dared to intervene. Maddox didn't know it yet, but this gas station clash was only the first spark in a firestorm that would engulf them all. a storm of violence, hidden secrets, and revelations that would flip everything upside down, connecting their lives in ways none of them could have imagined. The storm rolled in faster than Maddox expected, thunder cracking across the sky like a warning from the heavens as he rode away from the Ridgeview Gas Mart, but even the pounding rain couldn't wash away the image of Lila's trembling hands or the echo of Derek's promise for revenge. He pulled into a small diner 30 miles down the highway, hoping coffee would settle the adrenaline burning in his bloodstream, but just as he stepped inside, every phone in the diner lit up with an amber-like alert. Dodge Charger involved in violent dispute, suspects fled Ridgeview Gas Mart, caution advised, and though the alert didn't give names, the pit in Maddox's stomach dropped because he knew he had been pulled into something far bigger than a gas station fight. A waitress with soft brown eyes approached, recognizing him instantly from the biker patches on his vest, because apparently Derek had filmed part of the confrontation on his phone and uploaded it, twisting the story to make himself look like the victim, and the video had already begun circulating through a local Facebook group. "You should be careful," she whispered, "that guy's from a crew that's been causing problems around here, and they don't like being embarrassed publicly." Maddox's jaw tightened, realizing Derek wasn't just some random hothead but someone with connections, ego, and an audience he could weaponize. While Maddox tried to stay calm, wiping rain from his beard and sipping his coffee, 3 men in leather jackets pushed through the diner door, their boots heavy, their eyes scanning the room with an intent that wasn't subtle. He knew immediately Derek had sent them. The men approached his booth, blocking the exit, one tapping a finger on Maddox's table while saying, "You're the biker who thinks he can put hands on our boy." Maddox never touched Derek except to defend himself, but explaining that wouldn't matter to men who thrived on violence. Before they could escalate, the waitress slipped away and quietly dialed the sheriff, but the men were impatient. The tallest one lunged first, flipping Maddox's coffee onto the floor, and the entire diner froze as Maddox stood slowly, shoulders squared, voice calm yet firm as he said, "I didn't come here to fight, but I'm not running, either." Chairs clattered, a baby cried at a nearby table, and the storm outside intensified like nature itself mirrored the brewing chaos. The biggest man swung at him, but Maddox caught his arm, slammed him against the counter, dodged another punch, and the fight exploded into full chaos. Plates shattering, waitresses screaming, lightning illuminating the windows, but just as Maddox gained the upper hand, pinning one attacker with a forearm across the chest, the sheriff's deputies burst in with guns drawn, shouting for everyone to freeze. The 3 men immediately pointed at Maddox, claiming he attacked them, and before Maddox could fully explain, he found himself handcuffed and shoved into the back of a squad car while Derek's henchmen walked away untouched, smirking through the rain. But the worst part wasn't the arrest. It was the look on Lila's face when she appeared at the edge of the parking lot, rain soaking her hair, eyes wide with horror as she watched Maddox being taken. She tried to run to the deputies, begging them to listen, telling them Derek was dangerous and Maddox was trying to help her. But before she could reach them, Derek's Charger screeched in beside her, and he leapt out like a wolf guarding its prey, grabbing her by the arm and pulling her back so violently she stumbled. "You're ruining everything," he snarled at her, and then, loud enough for the deputies to hear, he shouted, "Stop lying for strangers," twisting the narrative yet again. Lila tried to break free, screaming that Derek was the real threat, but the deputies hesitated, unsure who to believe, and Derek used that hesitation to shove her into the car, slamming the door before speeding off. Inside the squad car, Maddox cursed under his breath, feeling utterly powerless, wondering how deeply Derek had embedded himself into this town's cracks. However, the night wasn't done with him. When they brought him to the station, a stern female detective named Sergeant Emery Holt entered the room, a woman with sharp eyes, dark braided hair, and a reputation for being unshakable, but when she sat across from Maddox, something in her expression shifted, not suspicion, recognition. She slid a photo across the table, a grainy image of Derek at a warehouse with men linked to stolen car rings, drug drops, and illegal weapon trades, and said, "I know who you ran into today. And I know he started it." Maddox stared, confused. She leaned closer. "I've been tracking Derek for months. The problem is, someone keeps tipping him off." "Someone close?" Maddox asked why she was telling him this, and Emery exhaled deeply before revealing the twist that changed everything. Derek wasn't just Lila's abusive boyfriend, he was her cousin, but not by blood, by foster care. Lila had been placed in the same foster home as Derek years earlier, and the family that took them in favored Derek heavily, treating him like a golden child while Lila was ignored, overworked, and emotionally punished. Eventually Derek grew possessive, seeing Lila not as family but a thing he controlled, and when she turned 18, she tried to escape him, moving into a small apartment, getting a part-time job, but Derek had connections and used them to keep her trapped. Lila isn't just scared of him, the sergeant said grimly. She knows something. Something Derek will kill to keep buried. Before Maddox could ask what that something was, a deputy rushed into the room. Breathless, a call came in about a disturbance near Ridgeview Lake involving 2 vehicles and someone screaming for help, and the description matched Derek's car. Sergeant Holt turned to Maddox, uncuffed him without hesitation, and growled, "If Derek's involved, Lila's in danger. I don't have time for protocol. You're coming with me." They raced into the storm in her cruiser, sirens slicing through the rain-soaked night, and Maddox felt his heart hammering, not from fear, but from a gut-deep certainty that something terrible was happening. As they neared the lake, headlights reflected off shattered glass and skid marks carved into the mud. Derek's Charger sat crooked, door flung open, radio still playing. A purse lay on the ground. And beside it, a phone with the screen still recording. Lila was nowhere in sight. But the video playing showed the truth at last. Derek wasn't angry about gas money. He wasn't angry about Maddox. He was angry because Lila had discovered what Derek had hidden in the trunk of his car. Something illegal, dangerous, and powerful enough to ruin not only him but the people he worked for. The last frame of the video showed Derek grabbing Lila by the wrist and dragging her toward the woods. Maddox's blood went cold. "Sergeant," Holt whispered, "if he took her into those woods, this isn't just abuse anymore. This is survival." What Maddox didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that Derek wasn't alone anymore. Someone else was in those woods. Someone far more dangerous. Someone who wanted Lila silenced permanently. And as the wind howled across the lake like a warning, Maddox stepped into the darkness with one thought burning in his chest: I will not let that girl disappear. The woods swallowed them in darkness, cold air slicing through branches as thunder rolled overhead like the world itself was growling at the violence unfolding beneath its canopy, and Maddox, drenched, breathing hard, followed the faint trail of broken twigs and dragging footprints toward the lake's deeper forest edge, flashlight beam trembling across mud and leaves, while Sergeant Holt radioed back up and loaded her weapon, her jaw clenched, her eyes blazing with the kind of determination only a seasoned officer carried. But even she could not hide the fear knotting her throat because the tracks didn't show only 2 sets of prints. There were 3, one far heavier, deeper, belonging to someone who wasn't Derek, someone who had joined the hunt unexpectedly. As they pressed deeper into the woods, they heard a girl's scream, sharp, terrified, echoing between trees, and Maddox bolted toward the sound with a speed he didn't know he still had, while Holt cursed and sprinted behind him. They burst into a clearing where the storm's fury illuminated a horrifying scene. Lila pinned against a fallen tree log, soaked in rain, bruised, struggling beneath Derek's grip as he shouted accusations at her. "You weren't supposed to open the trunk. You weren't supposed to know." And beside him stood a hulking man in a black hoodie, face partially hidden, arms tattooed with symbols that made Holt's eyes widen in recognition, because she knew exactly what those markings meant. This man wasn't local muscle, he was tied to an interstate criminal ring they'd been tracking for months, the kind that made Derek look like a child throwing tantrums. Maddox charged straight at Derek, ripping him off Lila and slamming him into the mud, fury exploding from him like wildfire, and Derek roared back, swinging wildly, but Maddox had had enough of his threats, enough of his cruelty, enough of the fear he inflicted, and pinned him down, growling, "You touch her again, and you'll regret it." But the hooded man grabbed Maddox from behind, yanking him off Derek with terrifying strength, throwing him like he weighed nothing, and before Maddox could recover, the man pulled out a switchblade, its metal glinting in a flash of lightning. Holt fired a warning shot into the air, shouting for him to drop the weapon, but the man didn't flinch. Instead he grabbed Lila by the neck and hauled her upright, using her like a shield, knife pressed to her throat as rain dripped off his hood. Derek scrambled to his feet, wiping mud from his face, eyes wild, shouting at the man, "Don't hurt her. She just needs to keep quiet," a statement revealing he valued her silence, not her life. Holt kept her gun trained, but she couldn't risk a shot without hitting Lila, and Maddox, gasping, bruised, forced himself up, eyes locked on the terrified girl whose tears mixed with rain, trembling in the grip of a man who clearly didn't care whether she lived or died. "Tell them what you saw," Holt demanded, voice steady, and Lila, choking, gasped out the truth she'd been too afraid to speak. Derek's trunk wasn't full of drugs or money. It was filled with stolen military-grade weapons, crates upon crates of them, tagged and destined for transport across state lines, and she had accidentally stumbled upon his operation when she went looking for her missing phone. The hooded man wasn't Derek's boss, he was the broker who supplied those weapons and expected them delivered without witnesses, and Lila became a liability the moment her eyes fell on the labels. Derek panicked then, shouting, "I was handling it. You weren't supposed to come here." But the hooded man turned on him with a sneer, declaring, "Boys like you never handle anything," before pushing Lila to the ground and lunging at Holt with the knife. But Maddox, fueled by instinct and raw determination, hurled himself forward, tackling the man mid-strike, the two rolling violently across the mud, struggling for control. The knife skidded across the ground, Holt kicked it away, and Derek took advantage of the chaos, grabbing a broken branch and swinging it at Maddox's back with a sickening crack, sending him collapsing forward. Holt fired a second shot, this time grazing Derek's hand, making him drop the branch with a howl of pain, but the hooded man was already back on his feet, charging Holt with fists clenched. Yet before he could reach her, Lila, shaking and desperate, grabbed the discarded branch and struck him across the knee with everything she had, buying Holt the second she needed to slam the butt of her gun into his temple and drop him unconscious. Derek, clutching his wounded hand, stumbled backward, eyes flicking between Holt's gun, the unconscious broker, and Maddox staggering upright. Panic consumed him and he turned to run, but Maddox grabbed him by the jacket, yanking him back and growling, "You don't get to run from this." Derek swung again, but he was exhausted, injured, sloppy, no match for a man driven by purpose. Maddox pinned him to the ground until Holt cuffed him herself, reciting his rights as rain continued to pour, washing away the mud but not the weight of everything that had just unfolded. Backup arrived moments later. Squad cars, flashing lights, paramedics, and as the chaos settled, Lila collapsed into Maddox's arms, sobbing not just from fear, but from the overwhelming relief of finally being free from a cage she'd lived in for years. Holt assured her she'd be placed under protection, that Derek and the broker were facing federal charges, and that she would never have to answer to either of them again. Maddox, bruised, battered, and soaked, squeezed her hand gently, telling her she had nothing to apologize for, and for the first time, she believed it. Days later, after the storm had passed and the sun returned to Ridgeview, Maddox visited Lila at a safe house arranged by Holt, bringing her a small gift, a new phone, one she controlled, one no one could take from her. She hugged him tightly, tears in her eyes, thanking him not just for saving her life, but for believing her when no one else did. Holt later revealed one final twist, that the weapons ring Derek was involved in had been active for years, and Lila's discovery had accidentally exposed the entire operation, making her the key witness in shutting down a multi-state crime network. Maddox didn't consider himself a hero. He told Holt he had simply done what any decent man would have done, but Holt smiled knowingly because she'd seen many men look away, but few step forward. As Maddox rode away from the safe house, the wind brushing against him, he felt something rare: peace. He never expected to cross paths with a crying girl at a gas station, never expected a simple act of kindness to unravel a criminal empire, and never expected that his protective instinct would change so many lives. But that's the thing about fate. Sometimes it doesn't knock, sometimes it roars up beside you on an empty highway, disguised as a moment you almost ignore. And somewhere down the road, in a town no longer haunted by Derek's shadow, Lila finally stood on her own feet, safe, free, and rebuilding her life, knowing that her story didn't end in the woods, or in fear, or in silence, but in the courage she found when a biker refused to walk away.